They promoted him over me, gave him my work, my office, and my team. Then I found what was really in his personnel file. Before I tell you exactly how a man who faked his entire career ended up in handcuffs in front of the people who chose him over me, tell me something in the comments. Have you ever watched someone get rewarded for work they didn't do? Drop stolen below. I read every single one. The promotion was supposed to be mine. Not in the way that insecure people tell themselves things are supposed to be theirs. Not entitlement. Evidence. I had spent 4 years building the regional compliance division of Drayton Financial Partners, from a 2-person department operating out of a converted storage room into a team of 11, managing oversight for 6 regional branches across 3 states. I had written the internal audit framework that the company now used company-wide. My name was on the methodology document. My fingerprints were on every system that kept that company clean. So when the director position opened up after Gerald Hume retired, I didn't just assume I would get it. I had receipts. My name is Solène. I am 34 years old. I have a master's in financial compliance and a background in forensic risk assessment. I'm not the kind of person who panics. I'm the kind of person companies call when the panic has already started and someone needs to make it stop. And on a Tuesday morning in March, sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor, I learned that none of that mattered. "We've made our decision," said Dale Pembroke, the chief operating officer. Dale had the kind of face that had never been wrong about anything, at least not in his own mind. Silver hair, imported suits, a handshake that lasted exactly 1 second too long. "We're going in a different direction." I looked across the table. Sitting next to Dale, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had already won, was Crispin Allard. Crispin had been at Drayton for 11 months. 11 months. He had come in as a senior analyst on a lateral transfer from a firm in Phoenix called Veritas Capital Consulting. He was charming. He was polished. He wore the kind of confidence that made people stop asking questions. He had broad shoulders and an easy laugh, and he talked about golf with Dale like they had known each other for 20 years. "Crispin brings an outside perspective," Dale said. "Fresh eyes." The board felt that was what the division needs right now. Fresh eyes. 4 years of my life reduced to a problem that needed fresh eyes. Crispin looked at me and gave me the smallest, most careful smile. It wasn't cruel enough to be called smug. It was worse than smug. It was dismissive, like I was already furniture. "I'm really looking forward to learning from the team," he said. He meant me. He was going to learn from me. And then he was going to manage me. I smiled back, because I am professional, and I said, "Congratulations." And then I went to my car. I sat in the parking garage for 11 minutes. I didn't cry. I'm not telling you that to sound strong. I'm telling you that because what I felt wasn't grief. It was something colder, something that needed time to become useful. I drove home. I poured a glass of water, not wine. Don't water, because I needed to think clearly. And I started asking myself the question that I always ask when something doesn't add up. Why? Here is what I knew about Crispin Allard in those first weeks after the promotion. He was 41. He had a LinkedIn profile with an impressive-looking career arc spanning 15 years across 4 financial firms. He spoke confidently about regulatory frameworks in meetings. He name-dropped the right people. He deferred to Dale in public and questioned everyone else in private. And he had no idea how the audit system I built actually worked. This I discovered not through snooping, but through my job. Because Crispin was now my boss, and he needed me to walk him through the compliance review process for the Q2 branch assessment. I sat across from him in what used to be my office and watched him squint at the dashboard like it was written in a foreign language. "Talk me through the flag categories," he said. I did. Slowly. Watching him nod at intervals that told me he was performing comprehension, not experiencing it. 3 days later, he presented my walkthrough to the leadership team as his own strategic assessment, word for word. I know because Petra, one of my analysts, came to me afterward with wide eyes and whispered, "He just said everything you told him. Exactly. He didn't change a single sentence." I told her to keep doing her work and to keep quiet for now, because something had started itching at the back of my mind. It wasn't just that Crispin was underqualified. Plenty of people get promoted over more qualified candidates. That is ugly and common, and it happens every day. What bothered me was something more specific. It was the way he talked about Veritas Capital Consulting. When people work somewhere for years, they talk about it the way you talk about a place you lived in. They mention specific people. They tell stories about specific situations. They reference the name of the parking lot they hated or the coffee machine that never worked. Memory has texture. When Crispin talked about Veritas, it sounded like a brochure. Clean, smooth, no texture. I wrote the name down on a notepad. Veritas Capital Consulting, Phoenix, Arizona. And then I did something that any person with a laptop and too much curiosity can do. I looked it up. The company existed. That was the first thing I checked. And it did exist. There was a website. So there were employee testimonials. There was a clean, professional logo and a suite of services listed in confident language. But the website had been registered 18 months ago. Crispin had supposedly worked there for 7 years. I sat with that for a moment. Then, I looked up the Arizona business registration records. They are public. Anyone can access them. I am a compliance professional. This is the kind of thing I do before breakfast. Veritas Capital Consulting, LLC, had been registered as a legal entity 22 months ago. 7-year career. 22-month-old company. The math did not work. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment. Because people expect this kind of discovery to feel like triumph. It didn't. It felt like vertigo. The ground had shifted, and I needed to figure out what I was standing on. I closed my laptop, I made dinner, I slept badly. The next morning, I opened my laptop again and kept going. I need to tell you about Petra. Petra Lund had been on my team for 2 years. She was 27, meticulous, slightly terrifying in her attention to detail, and the kind of analyst who noticed things other people filed away as coincidence. She had come to me 6 months earlier with a concern about an unusual vendor payment pattern in the Midwest branch accounts, the kind of thing that most people would dismiss as administrative noise. I had not dismissed it. We had flagged it together and sent it up the chain, where it had quietly disappeared into the space where concerns go when leadership doesn't want them. I hadn't forgotten about it. I had just been waiting, now, sitting in the small break room on a Wednesday afternoon. I told Petra what I had found about Veritas Capital Consulting. She listened without interrupting. That is one of Petra's gifts. Then she said, "Can I show you something?" She had been doing her own digging, not about Crispin, about the vendor payments we had flagged 6 months ago, the ones that went quiet. She pulled up a spreadsheet on her phone and slid it across the table to me. The payments had continued. After we flagged them, after we reported them, after the chain went silent, they hadn't stopped. They had just moved, routed through a different subsidiary code, disguised as operational maintenance fees, paid to an entity called Cormorant Facility Solutions. I looked up Cormorant Facility Solutions that night. It was registered to a holding company. The holding company's registered agent was a law firm in Delaware. That trail was designed to stop most people. I am not most people. There is a woman named Dryden Okafor who taught the Advanced Compliance Certification course I took 8 years ago. She is 62, retired from a 20-year career at a federal financial oversight agency, and she has the energy of someone who has seen every variety of human dishonesty and is no longer surprised by any of it, but remains, somehow, furious about all of it. I had kept in touch with her the way you keep in touch with the person who first taught you that your instincts are data. I called her at 11:47 on a Thursday night. She answered on the second ring. "You found something," she said. Not a question. "I think so. I need to know if I'm building a case or chasing shadows." "Tell me." I told her everything. In Veritas Capital Consulting and its 22-month registration, the vendor payments that kept moving after we flagged them, the Cormorant entity, Crispin's word-for-word appropriation of my work, the way Dale had pushed the promotion through without the standard review process. Dryden was quiet for a long moment. The thing you're describing, she said slowly, the pattern of it, the movement of funds after an internal flag, the placement of a specific person in the oversight role, the suppression of the original report. That's not sloppy. That's deliberate architecture. Architecture for what? Someone is using your company as a conduit, and they needed someone in that compliance director seat who would not look too hard. She let that settle. Solange, you were not passed over because you weren't qualified. I know. You were removed because you were. I had known that somewhere beneath the vertigo. Hearing it from her made it real. What do I do? You build the file, she said. Clean, sourced, time-stamped, and then you take it somewhere it cannot be buried. Where is that? Not internal, she said firmly. Not HR, not the board. External. She gave me a name. I want to tell you what the next month looked like, because I think people imagine this kind of thing as dramatic and cinematic. Confrontations in parking garages, covert meetings in coffee shops. It wasn't like that. It was quiet. It was methodical. It was 31 days of coming home from a job that was slowly being carved away from me and sitting at my kitchen table until 2 a.m, building a document that I hoped would matter. At work, Crispin had started redistributing my responsibilities. Not loudly, gradually. The way water erodes something, no single drop dramatic, just the slow persistence of it. He took the Q3 audit assignment and gave it to a newer analyst who had no relationship with the branch teams. He moved me off the quarterly reporting meeting, claiming he wanted to streamline the agenda. He asked me, in the gentlest possible voice, to focus on what he called foundational documentation work, which is the professional equivalent of being told to go alphabetize something and stay out of the way. Petra kept feeding me information. Carefully. She was careful in the way that people are careful when they understand the stakes. The vendor payments through Cormorant had continued at a rate of roughly $80,000 to $90,000 a month for at least 14 months. That was over $1 million moved through an entity that, as far as I could trace, performed no actual services. And here is where it cracked open entirely. Dryden had given me the name of a forensic investigator named Ambrose Teal. He had spent 12 years at a federal agency before moving into private practice, and he had a particular focus on financial fraud embedded in corporate structures. I sent him the file. He called me back in 4 hours. The Cormorant entity, he said. The holding company it traces back to in Delaware. I've seen that structure before. Same registered agent, same filing pattern. Where have you seen it? In 2 previous cases, he said. Both involved the extraction of funds from a company through fraudulent vendor payments, executed over 12 to 18 months, and then terminated once the take reached a specific threshold. In both cases, someone inside the company held the compliance position and ensured the flags didn't escalate. I felt the cold settle in my chest the way it does when something stops being a theory. Crispin, I said. I don't have a name yet, but someone placed in that role, yes, with intent. How do we prove it? We already have most of it. What we need is the connection between the Cormorant beneficiary and whoever is sitting in your compliance director seat. He paused. And we need to move quickly. Patterns like this don't run forever. When they're close to the exit, they accelerate. It was Petra who found it. She had access to the HR shared drive from a previous project and had never been formally removed. An administrative oversight that turned out to be very useful. She found Crispin's original application file. His resume listed Veritas Capital Consulting as his primary employer for 7 years, as expected. It listed a specific role, a specific set of responsibilities, and a specific set of achievements. It also listed a reference, a former supervisor at Veritas named Douglas Farron, with a phone number and email address. Petra called the number from her personal phone, pretending to be conducting a routine background verification. Douglas Farron answered. He confirmed Crispin Allard had worked at Veritas Capital Consulting. He confirmed the dates. He confirmed the role. And when Petra, doing the thing Petra does, She asked one small clarifying question about the founding of the firm. There was a pause that lasted just slightly too long. She called me immediately after. "He confirmed everything," she said. "But Solen, his area code, the number Crispin listed for his reference. It's a Phoenix area code, but I looked up the exchange. That number was registered 20 months ago. The reference was manufactured. The reference existed specifically to confirm a history that had been built 20 months ago. And that meant one thing: someone had constructed Crispin Allard's professional identity to place him exactly where he needed to be. I'm going to be honest. There was a night in week 3 where I almost stopped. Not because I was scared. I was scared. But that wasn't it. It was something else. Exhaustion has a particular gravity when you're doing the right thing, and the cost keeps climbing. I was doing extra work on top of my already diminished role. I was operating carefully enough that no one at the company could accuse me of anything. I was spending my nights rebuilding a case that should never have been mine to build. I sat on my kitchen floor for about 20 minutes. Not dramatically, just sat. And then I thought about the junior analysts on my team who had no idea what was happening around them. I thought about the branches being slowly drained. I thought about whoever was going to come after me if I walked away. I got up. I sent the complete file to Ambrose Teal. He filed it with the appropriate Federal Financial Oversight Authority the following morning. Within 48 hours, I was contacted by an investigator named Cassia Frond from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Division. She asked if I could meet. I said yes before she finished the sentence. While Drayton Financial Partners was planning its annual investor relations presentation, a significant event meant to showcase the company's financial health and attract a new round of capital partners. Federal investigators had been quietly monitoring the Cormorant account activity for 19 days. Crispin had submitted updated financial reports to the board in preparation for the presentation. Cassia showed me copies in our second meeting. The reports had been adjusted, revenue figures smoothed, vendor expenditures reclassified. The Cormorant payments buried in a line item labeled Regional Facilities Management. Dale Pembroke had signed the reports. Crispin had countersigned. The investor presentation was scheduled for a Thursday. Cassia told me to come in on Wednesday evening to review my testimony. She also told me, in the precise and careful language that federal investigators use when they want you to understand something without technically telling you everything, that Thursday was going to be a significant day. I did not sleep Wednesday night. I sat in my kitchen and I thought about 4 years. About the storage room that became an 11-person department. About the methodology document with my name on it. About Petra with her spreadsheet on her phone and her careful voice in the break room. About Dryden Okafor answering the phone at 11:47 and saying, "You found something," like it was inevitable. I thought about the Tuesday in March when Crispin sat across from me with his careful, dismissive smile. And then I made coffee and I waited for Thursday. The investor presentation was held in the main conference room on the 14th floor. The same floor where I had sat across from Dale Pembroke and been told they were going in a different direction. The room had been set up for 12 guests. Good chairs, real coffee, not the kind from the break room machine. A view of the city that made everything feel consequential. Crispin was at the front of the room when I walked in. He looked at me with that particular expression he had been using for weeks. The one that meant, "Why are you here?" Said politely. "Solen, I didn't have you on the agenda." "Dale asked me to sit in," I said. Which was true. Cassia had arranged it. I sat near the back. The guests filed in, 12 people, expensive suits, the kind that are quiet about it. Crispin welcomed them with the ease of someone who had been performing ease his entire life. He began the presentation. Liquidity position, strong, year-over-year growth, exceptional, expansion projections, conservative and realistic. He was good at this part. The performance, the confidence architecture. I could see why it worked on people who weren't looking underneath it. Then the lead capital partner, a composed woman named, I would later learn, Orinthia Sable, raised her hand. "Before we move into Q&A, she said. "We have a standard compliance requirement, a verification form. All participants confirm under penalty of federal prosecution that the financial representations made today are accurate and complete." She slid a folder across the table. Crispin smiled. He picked up the pen. He did not read the form. He signed it, passed it to Dale. Dale signed it. Orinthia collected the folder. She looked at Crispin. "Thank you," she said. "That's actually all we needed." And then Orinthia Sable placed a second folder on the table. Not a form, a badge. "Financial Crimes Enforcement Network," she said. Her voice had changed entirely. The social warmth was gone. What was underneath it was precise and immovable. "Mr. Allard, Mr. Pembroke, you are under federal investigation for wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The room held its breath. When Crispin's pen was still in his hand, Dale reached for his phone. An agent near the door shook his head once, and Dale put the phone down. Crispin turned. He found me immediately. People who have been performing a false version of themselves always know exactly when the performance has ended. He knew. "You," he said. It wasn't loud. It was almost quiet. I met his eyes. I did not say anything dramatic. I had not prepared anything dramatic because I had known, somehow, that the moment would not need it. The moment had its own weight. Two agents moved toward the table. The pen dropped onto the mahogany. The cuffs came out. And Crispin Allard, whose career had been built in a document 22 months ago, whose reference had been manufactured, whose entire presence at Drayton had been a vehicle for extracting money from a company that employed hundreds of real people, stopped performing. He just stood there, looking like what he actually was. The assets were frozen by end of day Thursday. By Friday, the board had convened an emergency session. By the following Tuesday, Dale Pembroke had resigned. Pending investigation. The Cormorant account, over 18 months, had received $1.4 million in fraudulent vendor payments. Ambrose Teal's analysis connected the beneficial owner to a network that had run similar operations at two previous companies, both of which had suffered significant unexplained financial losses in the years prior. Crispin had not been Crispin for very long. Federal investigators were working on that part. It was above my clearance level, and my involvement was complete. Petra was offered a senior analyst role under the interim compliance director. She called me when she got the offer, and I could hear in her voice that she was trying not to cry. I told her she had earned it. She said, "We did." She was right. 3 weeks after the arrest, I sat across from the new interim COO of Drayton Financial Partners, a woman brought in from outside to stabilize the structure. She had read the full investigative record. She had read my methodology documentation. She slid a folder across the table. Inside it was an offer for a newly restructured position. Regional Compliance Director, expanded scope, elevated reporting structure, compensation significantly above what I had been passed over for. I read every page. Before I respond, I said, "I want it documented in my contract that my team's contributions to this investigation are formally recognized." She nodded. "Already in there. Page 4. I looked at page 4. Petra's name was listed, and 2 other analysts who had quietly helped without knowing the full picture. I signed. Not because the signature meant I had won. I don't think about it in those terms. I signed because the work I had built over 4 years was still there, still solid, underneath everything that had been stacked on top of it to obscure it, and now the thing that had been placed over it had been removed. The room was mine again, not given back, recovered. I am not telling you this story so you will think I am extraordinary. I am telling you this story because I was almost ordinary enough to walk away. There was a night I sat on my kitchen floor. There was a morning I almost deleted the file. There was a version of this where I signed the revised job description Crispin quietly handed me in week 2, the one that moved me to a documentation role with a new title that meant nothing. And I told myself it was strategic. It was patience. It was choosing my battles. The only thing that kept me from that version was the question I always ask. Why? Not who wronged me. Not what do I deserve. Not how do I make them pay. Just, why is this happening? What is underneath it? And what does the evidence actually say? If you work in a place where the numbers don't add up and the people who notice are the ones who disappear, trust that feeling. Not out of paranoia, out of professionalism. Because sometimes the person they passed over for the job was not a casualty. She was the last obstacle. And obstacles, it turns out, can move in any direction they choose. If you have ever been punished, sidelined, or silenced for seeing something clearly, drop evidence in the comments. Because the truth doesn't expire. It just waits for someone patient enough to present it properly. Share this with someone who was told they were too much and not enough at the same time. And if you have a story, I want to hear it. Every single one.